Uncharacteristically, the dragons keep approaching the deer. Normally, dragons will wait for the animal to die, but this voracious dragon, sensing that the deer didn't have much fight left, decides to speed things up. The deer makes a last valiant attempt, but lacks the strength to fight or run. Once the first dragon makes the attack, the second one comes in for his share. And the two of them make pretty quick work of finishing off the deer. This could be the dragon's only meal for months, and they gorge themselves. Finally, the heat overcomes them, and they move to the shade to take a break. Some of the island's scavengers immediately move in. The boar cautiously approaches and steals a scrap. He knows this meal could have just as easily been him. The crew really wants to capture a young dragon to compare its samples with the samples from the older ones. Lewis took on this challenge and chased this small one around in the hot Indonesian sun for more than an hour before it finally sought refuge in a tree. This is the natural place for it to run. As soon as a baby dragon hatches from its egg, it runs for the trees. Adult dragons will eat a young dragon if they can catch it. Young dragons spend their first 2 to 3 years living in trees and eating insects, birds, and geckos. The rangers decide to noose the dragon in the tree. The dragon doesn't try to climb higher or make any attempt to run, but this little guy isn't ready to give up yet. The ranger pulls him from the tree, and he comes down fighting. He instantly charges after Lewis, mouth open and ready to take a bite. Lewis quickly throws a net into the dragon's mouth. This slow-motion replay shows just how close this youngster was to having a leg of Lewis for lunch. Even though this dragon charged after Lewis, he is not angry with the dragon. The Indonesians have a tremendous amount of respect for the animal they call Ora. The dragon is taped and taken to a shelter out of the hot sun for testing.
Stitches.
While Putra collects the samples, Don decides to try again to get a pulse oximeter reading. He is hoping that the skin around the mouth of the small one is thin enough to be translucent. Don's hunch is correct, and he gets the reading he is after. This is a rare opportunity to get a normal reading from a dragon in the wild that is not anesthetized. This dragon had been so fast and difficult to capture that the rangers decide to try and calculate its speed. They place a marker in the sand and measure the time it takes the dragon to pass a tree 30 feet away. Their rough calculation estimates the dragon's speed at somewhere around 25 miles per hour. The crew heard stories of a man from a nearby village on Flores who was bitten by a Komodo dragon and lived. Since there is no known cure for a Komodo bite, the crew would like to try and find out how this man was able to survive. They decide to travel to his village and meet him. The people of this small farming village live among the dragons who sometimes prey on their livestock. The crew met the villager on the road, and he invited them to his house to tell his story.
Komodonya diukur oleh PPA itu waktu.
The villager heard his dogs barking late one night and went out back to see what was happening.
Sudah berapa dia tangkap kerbau itu? Dia stun bentuk kaki 3 itu. Mau terkam saya. Orang bilang keras di situ, tapi itu karena parang tidak ini. Tapi kalau parang tajam begini Pak, bukan keras sebetulnya. Akhirnya dia lemah, sehingga saya ambil parang cincang dia mati.
Then after, it's okay. Boleh dia kasih keluar.
This is the native knife, the prang. It's a beautiful one.
From what we could get from the story that the villager told us about his bite was that he was bitten and then had to travel a long distance to get to what their medical care center was, which apparently was a shack, had a nurse that took care of him. From what we could understand was that he was there for many months. What happened during that time, we don't really know because he really doesn't know what happened to him. Why he didn't get sick and die, which is the classic story that surrounds a Komodo bite, I can't answer that. There's lots of questions about the Komodo dragons, about what they do, how they poison us, which we don't know, which is exactly why we're doing this project.
Duduk lama.
After sitting too long.
Dan jalan terlalu ini.
Right. The damage that he's done is probably going to be permanent damage that's not going to go away. It's going to end up, it's pain. He's going to have pain that can shoot down through here. He can have tingling and that numbness that he gets in his foot when he's resting too long and sitting. That is never going to go away, and it's from the bites that he's got because he cut the nerves, cut the muscles, cut the tendons, and all the tissue in here. There's so much damage.
The crew built a small field lab in the hotel on Labuan Bajo to work with fresh samples.
Some of the work we had to do on the island of Komodo itself, because work on fresh blood is mandatory for things like cell counts, preparing blood stains, other things in the complete blood count picture.
Once the field testing was complete, the samples were shipped to the labs. Some of the samples went to Corvus Labs in San Diego. Others went to the University of Denpasar in Indonesia. But the bulk of the research is being done at the Medical Research Lab at the University of Texas in Arlington.
The samples were received on liquid nitrogen, a small liquid nitrogen canister in cryotubes. And at that point, we cataloged and we transferred them to a permanent liquid nitrogen storage tank.
The first order of business is to confirm that the Komodo saliva is deadly.
The Komodo dragon appears to have a wide variety of bacterial flora in the saliva. Among the flora, we have found some that have a tremendous lethality in mice, kill an awful lot of mice, very rapidly.
So the saliva is deadly. Now the scientists will remove the bacteria from the saliva samples to determine if the bacteria alone is the deadly component.
To remove any of the bacteria that's in the saliva, we wanted to check to see if there was a viral component or mycoplasma or something, a toxin of some sort that was killing the mice. We used a simple filter separation technique, which consists of a syringe and the 0.22 micron filter, so we're removing any bacteria from the saliva. And basically it just twists together. You pull up your sample into the syringe, you attach it to the filter, twist it on, and just force your bacterial solution through, and what comes through is devoid of any bacteria. So we removed the bacteria and then we repeated the design, and we basically found no mortality, or in other words, the mice didn't die once we filtered the saliva.
This is good news. This means that the dragon does appear to kill with bacteria, Therefore, there must be something in the Komodo dragon's immune system that protects it from the bacteria. The next challenge is to isolate and identify the bacteria and to determine which ones are deadly.
We had swabs as well as straight saliva samples. From that, we took the swabs basically out of the cryotubes, streaked them across the surface of the auger, and then we put them in the incubator, let them grow overnight, and came in the next day and looked at colony morphology. In other words, we looked at the bacteria take on a certain colony morphology when they grow, and you can somewhat identify organisms based on their colony morphology. The saliva samples, we basically just took some of the saliva solution out, pipetted it on a plate, and just did a streak plate and looked for bacterial colonies. And then from that, we began staining and doing differential selective media to identify the organisms. But at the moment, we have probably 60 to 70 organisms identified. A lot of that's duplication. We didn't want to throw anything out until we know for sure that they're duplicated organisms.
The Komodo dragon is able to survive in the presence of a tremendous number of bacteria and a variety of bacteria in its saliva. And these bacteria obviously have access to the blood system because they bleed from their gums and they fight and bite each other. So what in the blood of the Komodo dragon prevents it from dying from bacterial infection? And we want to look for that.
The scientists have been able to figure out which type of bacteria is most likely causing the mortality. Through blood cultures performed on the dying mice, it appears that the prey is killed by a bacteria called Pasteurella multocida. Scientists then tested the antibacterial effects of the dragon's serum. The serum killed the bacteria, so there is something in the dragon's blood which gives them a natural defense against bacteria. The next challenge for the scientist is to try and determine what it is, and then use this information to genetically engineer a new medicine for fighting deadly infections. Also, scientists will use the results of these tests to determine which antibiotics to use to save the life of a Komodo bite victim.
Every time I've had an opportunity to go to Komodo Island in Indonesia, I've had an opportunity to learn something that helped me manage these animals more appropriately and manage them well. And I think that it has been extremely important to not just the way the Cincinnati Zoo manages our dragons, which has so far been very successful. Also, it helps me just to understand the animal in general.
If I were to describe what the trip meant to me, it was high adventure, a chance for science to find out something that didn't know before.
As it turns out, these are indeed magic dragons, and the magic is in their blood. As for Terry, with the samples safely frozen away in laboratories, he won't be stuck behind a desk for long. He is already dreaming of his next adventure.
I am the man that the little boy I was wanted me to be.